Hey everyone, I hope you're enjoying this little mini series of videos that I've been putting together for you on a Sunday evening on how to read the Bible. This video builds on last week's video where I introduced the whole idea of Bible genre, and I did it by using our mortgage statement and also a love letter from Lorna. If you've not seen that video, I want to encourage you to go and watch that video first so that then you can come back to this video really understanding what Bible genre is all about. In this video, I want to focus in on the different types of Bible text that we find in the Bible. The first big kind of Bible genre or type of text that we find in the Bible is narrative. Narrative is probably the easiest Bible genre for us to understand because so much of the Bible is narrative. Think about the story of Exodus, God's rescue of Moses from Egypt. What about Joshua and God's kind of taking hold of the people of God and helping them to invade the promised land and to settle in the promised land? These are great stories. These are great narratives. However, if we're going to understand these narratives, we need to understand that they're not written like a minute-by-minute explanation of what was taking place. That was not how Bible narrative was written. Bible narrative, yes, had historical accounts, but also fused with those historical accounts theology. The purpose of Bible narrative is for you and I to be able to understand the God who is involved in these historical situations. And so when you and I are reading Bible narratives, the kind of goal to understanding them, or the key to understanding them, is to really drill down and try and understand what was the author trying to communicate about who God is, about his involvement in the world around. We call that theology. What is the theology that is trying to be communicated through this particular narrative? So think about the book of Acts. The book of Acts is a great narrative of God at work amongst his people. What is it that God is trying to communicate through this? What is the theology that God is trying to communicate? The next big Bible genre that I'd love us to think about is poetry. And I love Bible poetry. I love the book of Psalms. This is probably my favorite Bible genre. However, it's really important for you and I to understand that Bible poetry is very different to English poetry. So much of English poetry is based upon rhythm and rhyme, and yet Bible poetry is based upon progression of thought. And the way that most of the Bible poets wrote their progression of thoughts were in couplets or ideas that kind of link together in these little groupings. So let me give you an example. In the Psalms, often the psalmists are comparing God with the physical world around. And so the psalmist might say something like this: "Your love is higher than the mountains." That's the first part of the couplet. Then the psalmist says, "No, that's not good enough. I need to express it even more. I know." Line 2, "Lord, your love is higher even than the heavens." There's the couplet. It's a progression of thought. God, when I think about your love, it's way higher than the mountains. No. It's way higher even than the stars and the moon and the sun. Your love is that high. That's how Bible poetry works. And so if we're going to understand the poetry in Scripture, we need to learn to be able to see structure, be able to see those couplets and how they work through the text. The next Bible genre that I'd like to introduce to you is the wisdom literature. Wisdom literature in the Bible can be found in the book of Proverbs, Job, Ecclesiastes. And wisdom literature is quite a strange literature type for you and I because we don't really have any modern day equivalent to these wisdom literatures. And so it's really important that you and I understand how to read this. And basically, wisdom literature is practical help for you and I on how to live lives as God would intend for us to live it. The book of Proverbs is not a book of one-line cast iron promises. That's not how we should read the book of Proverbs. The book of Proverbs is designed to be a book where we look into it and we see common sense examples or godly examples of how we should live our lives. If we take the book of Proverbs and we make each of the little sentences into a cast iron promise, we're going to find ourselves in trouble. The book of Ecclesiastes is really a book of reflections upon the world around and how we can live our lives in a way that's going to be pleasing to God. And so we need to understand that if we're going to really get into the wisdom literatures. The next Bible genre that I'd love to introduce to you is prophecy, and the Bible is filled with prophecy. And let me give you some examples. The massive book of Isaiah would be a book of prophecy. Jeremiah is also another very different type of prophecy. And then you've got some of the smaller books of prophecy like Micah and Malachi. Prophecy, if we're going to understand prophecy well, we need to understand that there was an original author and he was writing into a particular time in God's redemptive rescue history. If we don't understand that, we'll never really be able to get into the prophetic books. And so my encouragement to you would be, if you want to read some of the prophecy books, get a good commentary. And if nothing else, just read the introduction to the commentary so you can understand in your mind, when was this particular prophet writing and what were the circumstances around that they were writing into. That will help you get into these books, and it will help you to avoid the error of just kind of taking the book and trying to land it into today without understanding the original context. The next type of Bible genre is called apocalyptic writing. Apocalyptic writing is a really strange and alien type of writing for us today, but was actually quite common in the days when the Bible were written. And one of the ways of trying to understand apocalyptic writing is that in many ways it's like the writer is using these kind of graphic images to try and pull back the veil so that we can understand some spiritual realities that you really wouldn't be able to fully understand using different Bible genres. Some examples would be the book of Revelation. Think about the book of Revelation. It uses very graphic images to try and paint the future, a picture of what the future will look like. Can I encourage you that the key to understanding these types of writings is to understand that they're trying to paint the picture that God is the one who is in control. God is the one who is rolling out His plan and His history. And we must not lose sight of that, because one of the dangers with apocalyptic writings is that we can start to major on the minor things. Oh, I wonder what this means. And we can become incredibly fascinated with that, rather than seeing the big picture, which is that in all apocalyptic writing, it's talking about God's great mission being accomplished. And so you need to keep the big picture, that you need to major on the major and not major on the minor things when reading apocalyptic writings. I also want to encourage you that it's in the apocalyptic writings where so many people have got themselves in trouble. They've gone off and they've kind of almost made the apocalyptic writings the only books that they ever talk about. All they want to talk about is the end times. All they want to talk about is Daniel's visions. And that's all they ever talk about. Friends, it's one part of the Bible. It's not the only part. And we want to be understanding the whole of Scripture. So again, can I encourage you to hold them in balance? I also want to suggest to you that most of the weird and the wacky websites that there are out there focus in on the apocalyptic texts. And I think that's because the apocalyptic texts just give people this opportunity to kind of come up with ideas and thoughts. And so my encouragement to you is this: be very tentative about your conclusions on the apocalyptic writings, because they are difficult to understand. If you become so entrenched in your views and become so militant in your views, I want to suggest to you that you're probably in a dangerous place. The final Bible genre are the epistles. The epistles, like I said last week, is really just a posh word for letters. Some examples would be the letter to the Romans, Colossians, 1 Timothy, Titus, Jude. These are letters that were written by a particular author to a particular audience. Many of the audiences were local churches. And if we're going to understand these, we really need to understand the flow of the letter. It's very dangerous with an epistle to kind of slice them up into little one-line sentences and to take them out of context. So many of the epistles are written as a progressive argument throughout the whole letter. Take the letter to the Romans. Romans is a whole progression of arguments that build on one another that you really can't understand some of the later chapters of Romans unless you've really worked your way through the earlier chapters of Romans. And so my encouragement is this: if you want to understand the epistles, read them as a whole letter. Try and literally read them in one sitting as a whole letter. Try and then read them as a whole letter again, and then to start to put all the pieces together. I hope this very brief introduction to Bible genre has helped you to understand that it's really important that in your mind you understand the different types of text that you'll be reading as you get into the Bible.